Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our weekly podcast, the Rose and Rubini podcast, after a bit of an extended summer break. As always, my name is Manas Chawla, and I'm joined by CEO and Head of Research, Brunella Rosa. And this week, we'll be talking about a very pressing issue about how major central banks are seeing monetary policy over the next few weeks to months to come. But one of the most important stats we saw released at the end of last week were the figures for US non-farm payrolls. And it had some possibly exciting numbers, possibly disappointing ones, depending on how you look at it. Brunello, what was your reading of it?
So the non-farm payroll came in more or less in line with expectation at 350K. And also the backward revision was minimal compared to the previous month, which was an outstandingly high number, 528,000 new jobs created in a month. And the unemployment rate slightly rose, but this tends to happen when the participation rate in the economy also increases. So overall, one can say that the labor market figures were pretty solid, pretty strong, which seems to confirm the reading by the Fed that the US economy is still very strong and definitely not in slowdown or let alone contractionary territory, although some people believe that a slowdown or a contraction in economic activity is about to come towards the turn of the year. But for the time being, it seems like the US economy is still pretty solid.
Yeah. And it comes off the face of sort of maybe, not in recent weeks, but in weeks before that, we've heard comments about sort of centering on, is the US economy in a recession? And there's different ways of looking at it. And there's a very technical way, but a more broader macroeconomic way. So just to clarify, what you're saying is no matter what way you look at it, we're not in a recessionary economy.
No, exactly. And there are various ways of analyzing that. For example, if you look at Okun's law, which links unemployment and GDP growth, if one look at that kind of link in this period, still would reach the conclusion that the US economy is not in contraction, which of course has very important implications for what the central bank can do, because central bank, especially the Fed, has a dual mandate of keeping maximum employment while achieving an inflation target. Now, at the time in which these two goals may conflict, then the Fed may need to do very difficult choices. But at the time in which economic activity remains very strong, then the Fed can definitely focus on inflation fighting. And this is the reason why we believe that they will continue their tightening cycle in coming months.
Yeah. And we can't really be talking about the Fed and its rates unless we talk about the famed regular Jackson Hole meeting. It's quite sort of interesting how closely everyone watches Chair Powell's remarks to sort of decipher any bit of evidence they can on figuring out the direction of the Fed and the US economy broadly. But more large, I mean, we sort of saw some unexpectedly hawkish remarks. Was that your interpretation of it? And what do you make of the Fed's actions in sort of the months to come based on what Chair Powell said?
Yeah, so Chair Powell had these remarks that were read by the market as hawkish. In effect, he said that the Fed will continue to do its job of increasing interest rates in this phase, in spite of the potential damage to economic activity that might be deriving from the war in Ukraine, the disruption in global supply chain that derives from that. And clearly, the Fed aims at still achieving a sort of soft landing of the economy, but that might not be the case. And in the past, the Fed proved that if the price to pay to break the back of inflation and inflation expectations is the contraction in economic activity, they are ready to go there. So the market read these remarks as, okay, the economy is still strong. The Fed is focused on inflation, hence they will increase interest rates quite significantly in coming weeks and months, including a 75 basis point increase in September, most likely. And if that means a contraction in economic activity, a recession, so be it. We need to somehow rebalance demand and supply. So that's kind of the reading we had of the Jackson Hole speech.
Got it. Yeah. And I mean, it's worth pointing out, as significant of a meeting that the Jackson Hole is, one should be looking at the Fed's actions really cumulatively, and it's cumulative tightening rather than one specific meeting. And when you look at the cumulative tightening, what sort of a history does the Fed have, and what can you tell based on that?
Yeah, so the Fed said that they reached neutral territory at 250% in July. So they are now entering restricted territory, and they are ready to go to 3.5% towards the end of the year and early next year. That's somehow known and expected by the market. What is slightly less known, perhaps, or brought to the broader attention is that when inflation is still 8.5% and rates are, say, even 3%, 3.5% policy rate, this means that the real policy rate is still very negative, -5% or so, which means that with the negative real policy rate, the policy stance of the Fed is still very much accommodative. It would need much higher rates and a much lower inflation for this real rate to return towards zero and be less accommodative and eventually turning into positive territory, so that the Fed would be really in tightening territory. But for the time being, clearly the Fed is not planning to go to 8% in terms of policy rate, so they are effectively betting that inflation at some point will start declining.
Right. And moving across the Atlantic pond a little bit, looking at the European Central Bank, could we expect another rates rise there?
Yes, absolutely. The ECB meets this week, and another rate increase is definitely on the card. The only question is whether it's going to be 50 or 75 basis points. We are more in the camp of the 50, although probably some of the three rates of the corridor might be increased to 75 just to make it symmetric. But the reality is that 50 or 75 is a very, very close call. And then once again, it's not just the individual rate increase that matters, but it's the cumulative amount. The ECB has started in July, they will continue that in September, they will do another one in October and then again in December. So the ECB is definitely in a tightening mode. The days in which interest rates were zero or negative are over for some time, and therefore we expect more rate increases to come in coming months.
Yeah. Seems like what you're saying is sort of despite these many geopolitical, macroeconomic drivers that are all acting in different directions, many of them are actually canceling themselves out. And even if we don't know the precise, degree to which policy is moving, we know the general direction. And there are plenty of indicators showing us that way. So as always, Brunello, thank you so much for your time and insight. Really useful discussion.
Thank you very much. Till next time.